It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Jesse Pollock. Hey, Jesse, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me on. It's been a crazy few weeks promoting the film, but I'm definitely happy to be here.
Well, your film that you're talking about is called The Acid King, and I looked it up. This is the story of somebody named Ricky Kasso, is that correct?
Yeah, he was a teenager who was arrested in the summer of 1984 for killing a friend of his by the name of Gary Lowers over what essentially amounted to a drug debt, a matter of 10 bags of stolen PCP. And due to a series of misunderstandings and sort of the social climate at the time, what was essentially a very mundane pedestrian murder, if you could ever call one that, got twisted by the media and the police department that was in charge of the investigation into what I sincerely believe to be one of the very first satanic panic cases in America.
Satanic Panic. Okay, that's a good rhyme. Let's open that one up a little bit. Now, before him, and in fact, I'm looking at the picture, the movie poster cover, he bears a resemblance to Richard Ramirez, who was a notorious serial killer about 10 years before that, right?
Believe it or not, it was actually right in that same time frame.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yes. Kasso was arrested in July of 1984, and Ramirez was about a year and a half later. And the interesting thing about those two is there are a lot of similarities, especially within the context of that moral panic with Satanism going on at that time. Ricky Kasso was largely famous due to a photograph that was taken by an American journalist where Ricky's snarling at the camera and wearing an AC/DC shirt. And fast forward a year and a half later, Richard Ramirez, he leaves an AC/DC hat at a crime scene. We've all seen the famous photo of him in court with a pentagram drawn on his palm.
Right.
And I believe that hailed Satan to the judge when he was being sentenced. So it was all part of this sort of strange microcosm of American culture at the time where true crime and the occult kind of merged as far as the way things were reported at that time.
Do you think this was was there any leftover of this from Manson? Or would that be too far gone already? Yeah?
No, definitely. That is what I like to call the proto-satanic panic. It wasn't full-blown yet. You started to see the rumblings of that with the Manson family and the trial in 1969 and 1970. And then, of course, around the same time, you had films like Rosemary's Baby, and then moving a little further, you have The Exorcist.
Right.
And so you had all of this stuff kind of brewing at the time, the sort of fear of things like Ouija boards, which not a lot of people really remember this, but before The Exorcist, those were kind of considered more like, I don't know, like a crystal ball or a magic 8-ball type thing. It was more about fortune telling than communicating with spirits, whether they be evil or otherwise. But once The Exorcist came out, it very successfully transformed mundane things like a party game into, oh no, this could be a conduit for inviting the devil into your home. And then that sort of attitude carried over to rock music. You know, oh, if you listen to that music, you know, that can influence you to, I guess, adopt the tendencies of Satanism, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, having the Manson family in the news saying, no, the Beatles' White Album influenced us to commit murder, didn't really help things as much. And then fast forward all the way to the early 80s with Ricky Casso and Richard Ramirez, then it's full-blown with people blaming these murders on AC/DC, Ozzy Osbourne, Motley Crue got caught up in it. So it was definitely a long road that led to it, and it definitely could be traced all the way back to the Manson family.
Okay, well, I know the connection between the Manson family and the White Album. In fact, I interviewed a guy named Charlie Barrett who was working at Capitol Records in the PR department at that time. And
oh, wow.
They were getting inundated. He tells a great story in the interview, but they were getting inundated with requests from journalists around the world. They wanted interviews with John Lennon, and they wanted to talk to people who were connected with the White Album. And, of course, Capitol's sort of first priority was to shield the Beatles from all of this circus because,
of course,
nobody believed that he wrote any of the lyrics, or Paul McCartney, they wrote any of the lyrics for the Manson family, certainly. But I'm curious about the AC/DC connection. Now, was there one particular album that AC/DC they were scrutinizing, or just them generally?
It was generally. It wasn't so much like, for instance, with the Manson family, again, a lot of the analysis that went into that was the supposed perceived cryptic messages in the Beatles' lyrics in songs like Helter Skelter and Piggies,
right,
etc. But with AC/DC, it was more of, oh, well, they have a demonic image. Their record covers had like drawings, like characters of Satan, and Angus Young, their lead guitarist, he would sometimes have airbrushed devil horns, on his head on record covers. It was all silliness at the time, but again, after a decade of this, setup with, again, the fear over mundane things like Ouija boards and the connection being made. I mean, the connections between rock and roll and the devil, they go even further back from Manson. You could go all the way back to Robert Johnson and the story of, he sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads.
Yeah.
So it was, people were ready to believe in something like that. But as far as AC/DC's connection with Ramirez and Casso, again, it was mostly a superficial image thing. It wasn't, you didn't have people scouring the lyric sheets for, occult connections in DC lyrics like you did with Helter Skelter. The biggest irony of which, of course, is that song is about an amusement park slide, and Charles Manson was convinced it was about the fall of the Roman Empire and starting a new society and all this craziness.
Well, the one thing with the Beatles, though, that they were perpetuating, I don't know if they were doing it, but somebody was perpetuating that whole thing about Paul being dead and all the clues and albums and things. So it just sort of added to it when the Manson murders happened, and then they made the connections to the White Album. It just sort of, amplified the Beatles already putting cryptic messages in their songs, It just made even more people believe it.
Well, I always found that funny because even predating Manson and the Paul is Dead hoax, the Beatles were very aware that people were scouring their lyrics, trying to find some hidden, deeper meaning. And there's a great story in a few Beatles books where a childhood friend of John Lennon's talks about, I visited John at his home one day in 1967, and I had mentioned to him that there was a English professor in London who was teaching a literary analysis course on Beatles lyrics. And John thought that was so ridiculous that he sat down and wrote the lyrics for I Am the Walrus and said, let him figure that one out.
Oh, that's funny. I haven't heard that story. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's amazing what people can do. But you know what? Listening to what you're saying, I have to blame the media again. We seem to be in that groove these days with blaming the media and the term fake news and all of this stuff. And it really has gotten so skewed, I think, a lot more now than it was in the 60s and even in the 80s. But again, the media is taking some mundane thing and sensationalizing it for the purpose of selling news.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
and the Casso story was a big news story. It was selling for several weeks straight, leading on the front page of many major newspapers, the New York Post, the Daily News, the New York Times. There were we interviewed people in the film and for the book that I wrote about the case, where they were talking about there were reporters from Japan and London that were hiding in trees on Main Street in Northport, trying to get a scoop of this supposed devil cult that was running around town. Now, of course, this devil cult didn't exist. Now, granted, Ricky Casso did have a superficial interest in Satanism, like a lot of teenage kids did at the time. He was into Ozzy Osbourne and reading spooky books, but there was this concept that the media really tried selling, that Casso was actually the teenage leader of a satanic cult in Northport, Long Island, that had upwards of 100 members, all of which were supposedly at the murder of this poor kid, chanting and doing incantations and spells as he was being stabbed to death in front of a roaring bonfire. You know, this is what these major publications were leading with. And in reality, there were only 4 people at the crime scene, including Casso and his victim, Gary Lowers, and there was no roaring bonfire. It was literally just 4 kids smoking pot and doing acid in the woods, and there was an argument over some drugs that had been taken at a previous date, and it got out of hand. But because Casso had a reputation for being into, spooky things, reading books about the devil, and wearing that AC/DC shirt when he was arrested, it just snowballed into this ridiculous story that bore no resemblance to what really happened.
You know, I just thought of another case that had that sort of devil satanic connection. It was the son of Sam, David Berkowitz.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know how I've seen that movie, the one with John Leguizamo. I think it was called The Summer of Sam. Yeah, it was a pretty good movie. But they made the devil connection through the barking dog, but I think that was Berkowitz actually, right? He was a little bit nuts in that he actually believed it.
There have been so many different stories told with the Berkowitz case. It's very hard to pick apart what is true and what is not. It's a lot like the Manson thing, where there are certain camps within that lore. There are people that believe in the quote-unquote helter-skelter theory that was put forth by Vincent Bugliosi and the prosecution team. There are other people that don't believe in that at all. There are other camps that say it was all a CIA mind control thing. And the same with Berkowitz. There were people like Maury Terry who believed that Berkowitz was actually a part of a satanic cult that was running around that coincidentally had some sort of tenuous connection to Charles Manson. And I tried to read his book, The Ultimate Evil, and none of it made sense to me. But again, there are also people that say that Berkowitz made up the neighbor's dog thing. Oh, Sam told me to do this, in an unsuccessful attempt to get acquitted by insanity. So who knows why he really did it?
Yeah, that's interesting. So how did you get interested in Ricky Casso?
Well, the first book that I wrote was about a similar case that happened in New Jersey back in 1972. There was a teenage girl by the name of Jeanette De Palma who vanished while hitchhiking in Springfield Township, which is only about, I want to say 2 towns away from where I grew up, very close. And she vanished. No one heard anything for 6 weeks until a dog brought her arm home to its master, and a search party later found her remains on top of a mountain inside of a rock quarry. And the remains were too decomposed to even, ascertain any cause of death, let alone whether it was a homicide or not. But because it was so spooky, and there were, again, the prototypical satanic panic rumblings were starting. The Rosemary's Baby, the Manson family was only, 2 or 3 years in the rearview mirror at that point.
Yeah.
People just immediately assumed, a body in the woods, it must be Satanists. And the case was never solved. And when I wrote that first book, my co-author, Mark Moran of Weird New Jersey, he and I went through the various theories and tried our best to come up with some sort of a conclusion in that story. And once the book was released, an editor at Simon & Schuster was having lunch with my literary agent, Eric Myers, and said, well, we're getting ready to do a true crime line geared towards teenagers. Would Jesse be interested in doing a book for this line? Our only stipulation is, because this is teen-centric, we would like him to pick a case where both the killer and the victim were teenagers. And I had come across the Casso case while researching the Satanic Panic for that first book. And I always thought it was interesting, just the whole, media manipulation of, it was this cult running around, and of course the cult never existed. But I thought, even still, this is a very interesting story. So when my agent came back to me saying, Simon & Schuster would like you to do something like this, do you have a case in mind? Right away I said, I think this case deserves another look. So I submitted a proposal and a sample chapter or two to them, and they said, yep, run with it. And after 3 years of research, the book came out, and it led to the documentary a few years later. And after some COVID delays, it was finally released in November of this year. So it's been a long road leading to this film.
Okay, so the film has been released. It's on demand. It's called The Acid King. I'm trying to think how we can talk about the actual case, Ricky Casso, without spoiling the film. But since it's a documentary, it's all known anyways, right? There's no big surprise or spoiler to this, is there?
No, not really. The biggest spoiler or shock or surprise to viewers would be the people that have heard about this case believing the sensational headlines, because, again, this happened in '84. This is, of course, pre-internet, let alone pre-Google.
Right.
So people picked up a newspaper and thought, oh, well, I guess that's the story. And things weren't really helped much by the publication of a book in 1987 called Say You Love Satan. And that was written by a guy named David St. Clair, who was not really a journalist. He wrote really bizarre books. Like I'm not even joking. One of the titles of his previous works was called How Your Psychic Powers Can Make You Rich. He was one of those guys, and he decided he was going to go to Northport and write about the Ricky Casso case. And by and large, he was rebuffed by everyone there. They could tell what he was onto, basically. And so instead of going back to his publisher and saying, hey, listen, no one will give me an interview for this book, maybe we should cancel the project, he just made it all up. And the stuff that he didn't make up, he plagiarized from pre-existing newspaper articles and a really famous Rolling Stone piece that was written about the case. And people in Northport knew that this book was a load of crap, but everyone outside of Long Island just assumed, oh, it's a book. It must be true. People fact-check these things. And there were lawsuits threatened, and eventually it was settled out of court, and the book was withdrawn from publication. But there are a lot of people that have sort of fallen in love with that book, finding it in thrift stores and on eBay and stuff. And so I think the people that only know the case from that book and those sensational headlines will be very surprised when they watch the film and read the accompanying book to see what the real story was. Because while there was not a real satanic cult and this was not a sacrifice to the devil, there are several things that are stranger than fiction with this case. Ricky Casso was a very, very troubled individual even before the murder. Only months before he killed Gary, he was arrested for grave robbing because he was trying to get a skull to bring to the Amityville Horror House.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, this was a kid that wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders when it came to morals and reality. So all of that is in the film and in the book. And I can speak for myself when I say that when I started researching this case, I honestly thought at first, oh, all that grave robbing and Amityville Horror stuff, that's got to be made up. But we showed in the film, we interviewed the detective that arrested him for it, and that part of the story was all true. So I think a lot of things like that in his life made it easy for people around town and the cops to believe that, this kid was a Satanist with a devoted following, if not a cult. There were a lot of similarities between him and Damien Eccles of the West Memphis 3 case. So, again, while there are no major explosive things that we have found with the case that'll shock the world, it's still a very interesting examination about how a mundane murder case was exploited into this supernatural, almost Stephen King-esque horror story.
Right. Was there any particular weirdness about the murder in the sense that, like with the Mansons we were talking about, where they wrote piggies and helter-skelter in blood on the wall? I mean, was there anything bizarre with the murder?
Not at all, but the papers tried saying there was. The murder was a stabbing, essentially. Okay. While it was very gruesome, it was not ritualistic. But the newspapers took crumbs of information from the police and the medical examiner's office, which, again, it was a stabbing. Gary Lauwers was stabbed at the very least 2 or 3 dozen times. And, by the time his remains were recovered, they were skeletal. They found knife marks in the eye sockets. So the best the medical examiner could figure was he was stabbed in the face at some point, probably while writhing around. Well, the newspapers took that information and called it a, quote, 4-hour torture ordeal, saying that he was slowly stabbed to death over the course of several hours and that his eyeballs were gouged out while he was still alive as a sacrifice to Satan and all of this stuff, which was patently false. But, by the time people started speaking up in the town saying, well, hey, wait a minute, that's not what happened, the newspapers, their attitude was, well, it's already printed and it's already out there, So not a lot really could be done at that point. So it was very, very frustrating for the citizens of Northport, who found themselves swept up in this international news story that, again, was more akin to something out of a trashy pulp horror paperback than what really sincerely amounted to a tragic case of disaffected youth who were affected by drug use, trauma in their home. Homelessness was a big part of this story, but that stuff doesn't quite sell papers as much as Teenage Satan Cult does.
Yeah, apparently not. Well, Jesse, we got to wind this down. We are out of time, unfortunately. My guest is Jesse Pollock, and the film is called The Acid King. It was released on November 2021. I assume it's on all the major streaming platforms?
Yeah, it can be found on Apple TV, Vudu, Roku TV, and more on-demand services are being added every week. So you could definitely, with your smart TV, if it's not on a service you already have, you could bookmark it to get an alert on when it's coming to the platform you use. And then sometime next year, a DVD and Blu-ray release will happen.
Okay, super. Is there a website you want to give out?
The film does not have a website yet, but if anyone wants to follow the updates with the film and the release, our production company 1289 Films has an Instagram page, and that's at 1289 Films. And I post updates on my social media. I can be found on Instagram and Twitter at jpollock-author. That's JPOLLACK author.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming on. It was nice talking to you, and best of luck with the film. I hope it does well.
Oh, thanks so much, and thanks for having me on. It was an absolute pleasure.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Hi, this is John Morgan, Production Supervisor for DJC Productions. And you're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Sarah Say. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Let's see. You've got a book out called 7 Years on the Front Line. And is the book out now? Is it available?
It is. Yeah, it was released last year.
Last year. Okay. It seems like from what I'm reading on your bio that the book is sort of it's autobiographical, kind of tells your story.
Yes. Mainly focus on the event that happened in 7 years related to small business.
Why don't you give us just a little bit of your backstory? I know it says you came from Hong Kong to the United States at 18, went to college here, and then you started a business of some kind?
Yes, correct. Yes, in 2000, I started my first partnership, and then 2 years after that, I sold it, and I founded TSE Worldwide Press with my late father, and the company has been, we're still operating since 2004.
So you're a publishing company?
We're a printing provider, and 2 years ago, we also started doing some of our publications.
Oh, I see. What sort of publications do you do?
Right now, we do memoir, children books. I would say like book projects that focus on the legacy, that in areas that I'm very passionate about. For example, memoir for other people that I'm currently working on a new one on mentorship, and also a children books on mental wellness.
Okay. I want to read something here that's on your bio and just ask you to tell us a little bit about it. It says, early in your successful career as a publishing entrepreneur, Sarah agreed to a deal worth nearly $3 million with a new client. You had to advance the client $1.3 million to make the deal work, and then it looks like something happened. Tell us that story. That sounds very interesting.
That new client came to me in 2006, and they placed the order $3 million in 2007. Well, we didn't have any problem. It was $3 million, but I actually gave them back $1.7 million because I was not able to help them to finance the entire $3 million amount of purchase orders. So I did 1.3. They paid. We delivered, no problem. And so it was 4 years after that, they increased their purchase order from 1.3 to 2.6. And that year they have a new COO. He did things very differently, and that's when they defaulted $1.35 million. It was 2011.
Oh, so what were they buying?
Just printing service.
Oh, I see. Okay. So services you provided.
A lot of correct, yes.
Okay, so then they defaulted. They didn't pay you for services that you had already rendered to them, right?
Yes. So we deliver products, and we deliver them. But that time, because I ended up having to bring in a lawsuit against them. So during the discovery, that's when I discovered they hired one of my former employees. They also found another company. So they were in the process of getting rid of my company. And they claimed that everything I delivered to them was bad, was defective. But yet they actually sold them, and they got paid by their customers. So eventually, 6 months, before the trial, we were able, actually 3 months before the trial day, we were able to settle outside of court.
So they were actually plotting to put you out of business, essentially?
I would say yes, because it was bad. When I think back, I think they were in the process of using another supplier who was able to give them more financing, and they were in the process of getting rid of my company. But I don't think they tried to put me out of business. At one point they did, because they were trying to file a class action against my company. It never went through.
So were you competition for them, and they didn't like you? Or was this something more personal than that?
You know what? I actually don't know. I actually take it very personally. They were not my competition. All I knew that they found another supplier. And everything was really planned out by the new management team, because that year they have a new management team. So I was no longer dealing with the same individuals that I used to deal with at the beginning when I first, had the business dealing with this company.
Well, that's certainly interesting. So you ended up settling out of court with them, and then this whole thing just sort of went away?
Yes, they actually approached me. I was, one day before I had to fly out to attend the depositions, and that's when they contacted my lawyer. They said they wanted to settle with me because I was the one who sued them. So within a couple of days, my lawyer was able to put together a settlement agreement, and the case was settled, and we didn't have to go to the trial.
One of your talking points on here that I want to hit that's relevant to what we're just talking about says the shortcomings of the legal system, knowing when to sue and when to settle. What do you have to say on that?
I would say when you sue someone or you get sued, always try to find a middle ground to settle, because nobody wins except the lawyers. So that's what happened to my case, because the lawyer gets paid per hour. I have to mortgage one of my properties in order to afford all my litigations, all my lawsuits, all my defenses. So, always try to, of course, always have everything in writing, whether you're a small business or you're a big corporations, just to, avoid the potential of having to litigate a situation. Because I do believe a lot of business or dispute can be settled outside of court without having to go through a lawsuit.
What do you think about, I know you came from Hong Kong originally and you live in the United States now. A lot has been going on over there. Prior to COVID, we saw hundreds of thousands of people protesting in the streets. What do you think about what's going on with China sort of? It seems like they're encroaching into the life of Hong Kong ever since the British left. And I know a lot of people in Hong Kong don't like it. They want their freedom. They want to be able to do what they like to do without having mainland China as their, sort of strict father. What do you think about everything that's going on over there now?
I would say I was there in Hong Kong at the beginning of the protest. I was very disheartened by the destruction in the city that I was born in and the city that I grew up with. Now, I'm not very savvy with all the political news, but I think that there should have been a better way to resolve the situation rather than destroying the city, because a lot of citizens, the lives were affected because of all these protests, mainly destructions. As far as the political situation, and unfortunately, I just don't have enough information that I can share that with you. If I'm going to share on behalf of the people I know, we prefer to have peace instead of protest. So I haven't been back for several years because of COVID. So I haven't really been able to experience what is actually going on, in Hong Kong right now. I wish I had better information or better answer for you.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. I was just curious because, I think a lot of Americans sort of feel for the Hong Kong people. I think China is making aggressive moves towards Hong Kong and probably to Taiwan, who were both, allies of the United States. And it was very heartfelt when I saw the protests of people in Hong Kong waving American flags and, wanting to be free. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. COVID has seemed to thrown a blanket on everything. And until we get rid of this, there's really not going to be any other, I think, major news happening. But we'll see. All right. So what kind of advice would you give to somebody who wants to start a business of their own? I know it's not easy, and a lot of it has to do with the confidence that you think you can make a success of whatever it is that you're doing. But what other advice can you give to somebody who wants to start a business?
I think the person who wants to start a new business, they need to ask himself or herself why. Why did they want to start a business? If it's for money, they're going to be very disappointed because a lot of startup business owners, they may not even get paid for months or year before they actually start making profits. I would say majority of startup business don't even last, will end up closing. I would say to find out the why, the reason. If you find an area in your life that you're absolutely passionate about, go for it. But you're going to have to realize that there will be a lot of sacrifice. But if you believe in something you want to pursue, don't give up your dream. Just like I'm in the area helping authors, self-publisher to create, innovate new book project and packaging design. I'm absolutely in love with the business I'm in. So when we were just starting, we were sleeping at the office. I didn't get paid for months before the company started making profits. So the first question is you find a passion that that you're absolutely crazy about, that that even if you don't get paid, you still continue to pursue. Secondly, save us some money. If you have personal debt, don't start yet. Save us 6 months of reserve on your personal life and also for the business, so that you have something to live on. And also, find good people to work with you, trustworthy people, individuals who have characters and also will share your dreams and are loyal and will stay with you through thick and thin. So I think these are the three advice I would give to startup companies, and new business owners.
I know that finding people to work for you, often under less than ideal circumstances, is difficult. You said to find people that are loyal, that are going to probably share your dream of whatever it is that you're doing. Do you think it's wise to get involved with your family in business?
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Family members need to use the same standard as if you're hiring someone outside the family. That the family member needs to be able to separate business from personal, from like a family relationship. I would say it's possible. It happened in my case. When I first started TSE, it was started with me and my late father. He was a great mentor to me, and then he recruited my brother and sister and my mother to help with the business. And that's the reason why we're able to become so successful within such a short time, because of the commitment by family members.
So now your company is, I'm sorry, what's the company called?
TSE Worldwide Press. That's the parent company. And I have a second company called United Yearbook. United
Yearbook, which is a publication of like college yearbooks, high school yearbooks?
High school yearbook for police departments, for middle school, for college.
Oh, okay. So 7 years on the front line, is this your first book writing, or have you written other books?
7 years on the front line is my first book that was released last year, 2020.
Okay.
And my new book just got released this month. It's From Illusion to Reality. It is a career guidebook for young professionals.
Okay, what made you decide to start writing? I mean, you've been in the printing and publishing business for a while, but what made you decide to start writing on your own?
I shared it on my website. If readers want to read more, go visit my website. But here, I'm going to share that with you. It was at the request by a lot of peers and also my family members who saw me through the 7 years of adversity. That everyone told me I got to share my story with the world because the unique experience I had, it doesn't happen to everyone. So I was able to put together the story with the help of a ghostwriter. So we complete the book in 3 months, but it took about 7 months to have a group of peers, 30 people to review the book and give me feedback. Okay. So it took another, about 1 year, from writing to the official launch.
How's the book doing?
The book is doing good in a sense that it's making a lot of impact to individuals who have, listened to my stories. And I use it as a teaching guide when I do my speaking engagement at university or in the, other groups. Because at the end of the chapter, there are lessons. So even though I went through 7 years of situations, but I think the biggest takeaway for me is all the lessons that I have collected, for the, within the 7 years.
Well, Sarah, we do have to wrap this up. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, it's Sarah Y as Yvonne, TSE.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. And best of luck with your business and your book. And I hope everything goes well for you in the new year.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.